I remind people when they criticize my rankings and say, why did you move that team up a spot or that team down a spot or whatever, that I don't create these rankings in a vacuum. You have to determine all the other things that are going on with all the other teams around them, and how the performances this weekend affect everybody's schedules going back. You may have a week 3 win against somebody, and this suddenly gets devalued or increased in value based on what that team's currently doing. So I go back and look at the previous wins and losses as well, because they change in stature. A win over Iowa is not what it was 4 weeks ago. And you could say that about every situation in the country. It is a different evaluation today than it was at the time that the game was played. But anybody who watched and understands the level of play of Nebraska and Washington, Ohio State did not look impressive. They go to Nebraska, they win, workmanlike kind of effort, not impressive, not the end of the world. Okay, I don't see that as if anything, it's a negative against Ohio State, but I don't think it's any kind of severe negative. Nebraska's playing everybody close. Oregon plays Washington. Washington hasn't shown capable of doing anything against anyone. Like their quality of play versus Nebraska's quality of play, I don't care what the records are. They're nowhere near playing the quality of football that Nebraska is playing against the likes of Ohio State and Oklahoma and Michigan State. You can say all you want about Nebraska and look at their record. They obviously, when they step on a field, now that they've done it 4 times against those kind of opponents, again, Michigan State, Ohio State, Oklahoma, that they put out a pretty solid performance. So Ohio State, what they did was not impressive, but it was still a victory by 9 points. Oregon played Washington. They technically won the game by 10 points, but if you watched the end of the game, you realize that it was a 1-score game, and they were very close to losing a game against a Washington team that is just not very good. And the AP leaped Oregon 2 spots over Ohio State based on that Washington performance. Like, that makes no sense.
No, it doesn't at all.
It's just so the comment that everything will work itself out. Yeah, most of these situations, teams are playing different teams that will work itself out. We'll know who the best team in the Big Ten is by the end of the season. We'll know the best team in the Big 12 and so forth and so on. But it doesn't all work itself out. Some of it works itself out. Probably most of it does. But I will argue that most seasons, not all of it works itself out. Just because, and I'm going to use a pretty severe example, and hopefully my analogy comes across right. If I get wrongly committed for a crime and I get taken to the electric chair and that's the end of my life, well, did it work itself out? No, there was a conclusion. I think there's a difference between it worked itself out and there's a conclusion. Yes, there's going to be selection Sunday and a committee is going to tell us what 4 teams make the playoff. That doesn't mean it worked itself out. That just means that was D-Day and they had to make their selection. That doesn't mean that there aren't going to be teams left out that have a claim or an argument for a spot.
Yeah, no, that is a really solid analogy. I'm with you. Yeah, and I think, we've talked about Cincinnati a decent amount here on this show, and I think I've went from the perspective of, I think there's a good path for them with beating Indiana and Notre Dame to where they're at now and what's going on around them. SMU's lost 2 games in a row, so that game does nothing for them. I guess their only hope is for Houston to keep winning, and they were very unimpressive against a pretty bad South Florida team. So they've got to have massive, and I don't know that there's a situation where they'll make it. Any situation. Any situation save from I mean, just total chaos in a lot of these conferences. Oklahoma losing a couple games, Oklahoma State losing another game in the Big 12, and the Big 12 doesn't have a participant. Oregon losing to Utah, and the Pac-12 doesn't have a participant in the college football playoff. I mean, that's something that might work out for them, but save from that, I think that's the only path that they have going forward. So, yeah, I think it'll be uh, so interesting to see how this plays out. Alabama has a couple of bye weeks, so to speak, until they have Auburn. But um, and I don't know. I think the point that you made was very interesting that I wanted to kind of wanted to talk through with you, was that very very good point to the team that a team is at the beginning of the year doesn't necessarily equate to where they're at now. At the beginning of the year, we thought, and obviously Georgia has nothing to worry about, but this is just an example. Georgia barely beats a number 5 Clemson, 10-3 at that point. And now we know that Clemson is a very average team right now. 6-3. They're finding ways to beat bad teams, in the ACC. But still, I think when you look at that, you don't value that the same way. And Georgia has wins against. I mean, it's not a big deal because Georgia has wins against. Although Kentucky's unranked now, but they have wins against number 11 ranked Kentucky at the time, number 8 Arkansas, which at the same time they're not as bad. But I think it's very important, just overall, just to look at exactly what some of these teams are at this point in the year versus where they were when they played. Like I said, you're saying the perfect example. Oregon's the same situation, and Ohio State to a certain extent. Like, they're not the same team. They're much better defensively than they were. Although they didn't play great defensively against Nebraska, but still they're much better defensively than they were against Oregon early on in the year. And I think you've got to, and I haven't really heard anyone talk about this, you've got to devalue Oregon just a little bit with the loss of C.J. Verdell. I mean, Travis Dye is a really good running back, no doubt about it, but he's not the home run hitter that Verdell is. So I think that takes away. And Anthony Brown is a very, very average. We talked about this before the year, and it's done nothing but confirm, I think, what both of us thought about Anthony Brown, a very, very average quarterback. And I think a quarterback for a top 4 team, and he throws for 80 yards, 90 yards against Washington on Saturday. I think I have it here. 10 of 20 for 98 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Yeah, I mean, granted, they ran for 300 yards, so I get that. But at the same time, if once he gets into a situation, and he may not face this in the Pac-12, but once he gets into a situation where a team is defensively good enough to shut down their running game and he has to win a game by himself, I would take almost any other quarterback of any team in the top 10 right now over him. Yeah, no, I think I would. I mean,
I would take all of them.
Notre Dame's a closest one probably that I would, that from Jack Cohn and then the Buckner kid as well. But other than that, I would take any of the other quarterbacks. So it's a quarterback game now. I mean, the quarterback makes or breaks it for you, because especially, like I said, when you're playing some of these really good defensive teams that have the ability to shut down one part of your game, then, what do you do at that point?
The funny argument that people have is about quality wins. So almost any time that I run down what I consider to be quality wins, people will say, well, they're not any good, and they're not any good. They're only 6-3, and they're only 5-4. Okay. Let's understand that there are very few wins in the country against teams there's obviously no wins against anybody that's undefeated. There are very few wins against one-loss teams. That's because those teams haven't lost games. So there are a lot of really good 6-3 teams. Well, when I say really good, take that for what it is, like top 40 type teams in the country. When I did the rankings that I do yesterday, I counted up the 6-3 teams in the power, and this goes to show you how difficult it is to rank teams. There are 13 6-3 teams in the Power Five. So how do you sort through that? Some of them are I think are really good teams. Penn State, Wisconsin, others. So when you start to say, for example, and I can't believe I'm defending Alabama, but I don't think they really need defending. And I'm typically not the person to do it. But people are bashing their schedule and who have they beaten? Well, again, there are very few teams in the country that have wins against like 8-1 teams and 7-2 teams because they don't lose the games. So Alabama has beaten Ole Miss, and then they've got a collection of wins against teams that are they're top 40 teams in the country. Tennessee, Mississippi State, Miami, Florida, teams like that. And they've got a 3-point loss on the road on the last second of the game, the last kick of the game against Texas A&M. So
I think the Ole Miss is the one that trumps that. Anybody that watched that game, they dominated that game from beginning to finish.
Yeah, it was 28-0 at halftime.
Ole Miss got got a couple of points late, but yeah, I mean, I think the good thing for Alabama would be if Ole Miss were to keep winning, or A&M for that matter, to keep winning. I think that helps them. I think it's hard to look in our crystal ball just to see what this looks like. But Alabama, they'll have 2 really tough games to end the season. As bad as Bo Nix is on the road, he's pretty good at home. So I think Auburn will provide a significant challenge. They're pretty decent defensively as well, which helps. I mean, they held not the Texas A&M's a juggernaut, but they held them to 3 points for a decent amount of that game until I think they just kind of got worn out. And then I don't know there's going to be a game here. I mean, and it may not happen, but there's going to be a game where Georgia's going to struggle. They're not going to play, whether it's this week against Tennessee or whether it's against Alabama in the SEC championship game or Texas A&M or Auburn, whoever it ends up being, or if it's in the playoffs or something. There's going to be a game that they struggle and they've got to find a way to win where maybe they didn't think that they were going to have a struggle. Almost every team has to go through that. Having said that, I don't know that Alabama's the team that. I mean, they've got a mental block against them. Obviously, they've got to get over. But watching those 2 teams on the field, Alabama struggles on the offensive line. I think that's their biggest weakness right now. That was very evident. I know they had a couple of guys out injured, but I think at least one maybe that got injured early in the game against LSU. But just in general, even before that, their offensive line's not as strong. Running backs aren't as good as they've been in the past. Brian Robinson, he's decent, but he's not. I don't know that he's the level that they've had there in the past. So I think obviously one of Georgia's strengths is their massive and dominating defensive line. So I think that gives them a clear advantage. I would even go to the point where I'd be a little bit surprised if Alabama was, even knowing who they are, if they were able to beat Georgia. So I mean, but I think it's obviously going to be a great game that a ton of us are looking forward to. But I still think, in the whole mode from your point, Mark, on these things will work themselves out. I still think that we're going to see a decent amount of chaos. I don't know that it's necessarily going to be in the SEC, but I think we're going to see some things happen. And I don't know where it's going to be. I don't know if it's going to be in the Big 12 or, I mean, for all intents and purposes, the ACC is irrelevant now with Wake losing. But you've got 3 teams in the Big 10 that are vying for a spot. I think Michigan's probably better equipped. Kind of the same thing with Alabama and Georgia, right? I mean, Michigan's got a big mental block of trying to beat Ohio State. Um, they seem to be more equipped to at least be competitive and challenge Ohio State more than they have in the past. Defense is strong. They've got a good running game. They've got a quarterback who's not great, but he doesn't make a lot of mistakes. Um, and and they get the game in Michigan this year, so I mean, maybe that helps. But I don't know. I think we're going to see whether it's the Big Ten or the Big 12. We're going to see some chaos.